Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I think we're about to get started. So thanks for coming. This is Security Best Practices for Lightning Components. I'm Ryan Flood. I'm a security engineer here at Salesforce. I primarily work on our web CRM product as well as our App Exchange. So I'm one of the guys who does those reviews when you submit your app to get sold on the App Exchange. And I want to introduce Hormazd.
Hi, I'm Hormazd. I work with Ryan in the same team. I handle mostly Lightning security as far as our core product goes. So if you have any questions of how we do it on the platform, I'm the one to ask.
Yeah. Cool. So before we get started, we have to make the lawyers happy. So we're just going to say we make a lot of stuff, and we're always making more stuff. Please make any purchasing decisions on the great products and features we have now, and not anything we say in this talk that might allude to even better and greater things in the future. But there's a lot of security stuff that we want to also promote. This isn't the only time you should be worried about security, so come to some of our other talks. We have all sorts of talks. You can find them at bit.ly/df16sec, or just visit our booths in the developer forest or the admin cafe. We have some pretty good coffee served to you by our wonderful baristas. So lots of fun there. But I want to talk to you, and I want to kind of define who you are and let you know what you need to be so we can understand this presentation. So we're primarily looking for Force.com developers. That is people who are really comfortable with Apex, really comfortable with Visualforce. They've written a few apps. They know how it goes. Lightning's a little new. We don't expect you to have complete knowledge of Lightning yet. That's a lot. But we want you to be familiar with it. You've maybe written a component or two. You've gone through a trailhead. But those of you who aren't so technical, maybe you're a technical manager, maybe you're a product guy, you can still get a lot out of this. But I would really encourage you to find the recording for this after the fact and send it to some of your developers so they can learn how to better secure your Lightning apps and get it through the App Exchange security process quicker. And Hormazd, want to tell us what we're going to learn?
Right. So by the end of this presentation, we hope that you will learn and understand the functional and security aspects of Lightning itself. It's not very clear out there, like what a developer, when they're creating a component, what they have to do to pass through the App Exchange. The second thing we hope that you'll learn is that where does your responsibility end and where does the line get drawn in the sand where Salesforce has to take over its security. So what do you have to do to make sure your component is secure, and what do we do as a platform to provide security to you? And finally, as Ryan mentioned, we do App Exchange reviews all over the time, and we see these common mistakes that are there in Lightning components being submitted, and we want to make sure that you don't commit those same mistakes. But first, let's get through some key terms over here. A lot of people are a little bit confused about the difference between Aura and Lightning. People think they're the same. So Aura is basically an open source framework that has been written by Salesforce. It's this fantastic framework that anyone can use to create beautiful applications that are cross-platform. You can do whatever you want with it. And Lightning is our customized version that we use in the core. So when you log into an org, what you see in Lightning is basically what we have created. Lightning also has these fantastic things that we have added in, like our own custom components, things that make your life easier when you're developing for Salesforce. And what are Lightning components? These are modular and reusable sections of UI. And this is something that I cannot stress enough. It is a reusable section of UI. This is what you need to take into consideration when you're creating Lightning components. As far as security goes, because your component can be included in someone else's component. It could be interacting with someone else's component. It could be interacting with our platform. These are all things you need to take into consideration, because who knows what component is going to change an attribute in yours? You need to think about that. And the second thing is that when you create these components, there's a whole mess of things that you use. You use HTML, you have custom CSS defined, you have JavaScript all over the place. All these things have to be mashed together to make this great component. So as it is highlighted in red over here, you're building modular and reusable sections of UI and not a fully fledged UI. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can make a very small text box, or you can make an extremely large application all in the one same component. But as we want to use it is as a modular, reusable section of the UI. So you can see over here, this is the homepage of our latest release. Everything in red is a component. You can see this great graph component over here. It has a little refresh button that's been included inside the component. There's an assistant component on the right-hand side. There's a little activity component inside of it, the new task buttons. Each individual thing highlighted in red has to interact in a safe and secure manner with the other thing outside of it. So this is very important. So what kind of data are you going to transmit? Are there any kind of restrictions when you're trying to access particular records? All these things have to be considered. So here, I'm sure you're very familiar with this. This is directly from our developer guide. What does a Lightning component structure look like? You have the main app or component, which is the one file where you define how the component is supposed to look like, what divs are going to be there, what text boxes, what have you over there. All of that is defined in that file. That's the one main file that actually creates a component. And then you have all these other files along with it. The other main thing is the controller. This is where you define your business logic, what events need to be fired, how are you going to handle certain events from a user, what happens when a click is done, what happens when you're trying to reload a page, all that in the controller. The renderer is a custom piece of JavaScript that you write when you want to re-render your component. So for example, I want to refresh a component, but something has changed. Some business logic has changed over there, and you want to render your component a little bit differently. The main thing you need to think about when you're with regards to security over here is that the renderer has direct access to DOM elements in JavaScript. So you can mess around with the window, you can mess around with document over there, and we do not want that to happen over there. The renderer is extremely powerful piece of code, and you need to be extremely careful when you're writing that code. Also, there are other scenarios. What happens, which Ryan will actually demonstrate in one of our demos, what happens when you re-render and you don't think about other components messing around with yours. And finally, you have the helper class function. Basically, this file is for helper functions, like very common helper functions, such as converting different date formats to another date format, or you want to do time differences. Functions that you will reuse all over your code, but you want to make sure that you don't rewrite it all the time. Another thing you need to think about over here when you're with regards to the helper code is that it depends from where this helper code is called. So if it's called from the controller, it has all these great security features that it cannot mess with the DOM. You do not actually mess with your component too much. All of this is taken care of. But if you're calling it from the renderer, you again have to, it inherits that security considerations again. So if I call a helper function from inside the renderer, it can access window, it can access document. And again, you can mess up a lot of things over there. So in this presentation, we'll have three main considerations while building a Lightning component. The structural considerations, how exactly is your component put together? So how exactly are you going to define the app itself? How are you going to define the JavaScript? How they're going to be all mashed together? The functional aspect is how exactly does it interact with each other? I mean, like how events are going to be handled, how is it going to interact with the Salesforce platform, what endpoints are you going to call? All of these have to be taken into consideration. And security. Security is a special little thing in itself over here where you need to enforce extra measures in your component to make sure the component is secure. And we'll go through all of these, which Ryan will do now.
Yeah, thanks. So let's start with the base. Let's start with the structure of our application. As you can see by that complicated diagram out there, that's actually pulled directly from our Lightning developer guide. And I'm going to boil it down to just a few key takeaways for you guys. Let's make sure we're treating our data by its right type. There's absolutely no reason if I have a contact that his phone number is 415-555-1234. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Similarly, let's think about that from terms of security. If we have some raw strings, let's make sure we're treating those as raw strings. Let's not put those into an HTML context. Or if we have some rich text with bold fields and underline, let's make sure we're actually throwing that into a rich text field and not just directly onto the document. That can get a little dangerous. Like Hormaz has said, we can do a lot with Lightning components. We can have a small text box. We can have a checkbox. We can have a refresh button. We can have all of Salesforce 1, all in one component. It's a lot easier to think about the security of a small checkbox and then the security of 5 small checkboxes inside a form than it is to try and tackle this monster component. And when you're building Lightning components, there's actually ways for you to step outside the Lightning framework. When you have button clicks, we strongly encourage you to use Aura events to respond to those button clicks. That way you have access to the Aura framework, you have access to all the Salesforce data, but you don't have to. You can respond in pure JavaScript. But once you step out of the Aura framework, a lot more responsibility falls on you for the security of your code and the stability of not only your code, but the entire Lightning platform. Any resources you use. Some of you may have been to that third-party resources and Lightning components talk. I would highly recommend for those of you who haven't seen that, please go watch that recording. That has some great information in it. But if you have static resources or resources you want to use, zip them up and include them in your application. It really helps us, from a security perspective, find if there's any bugs, any security issues in components we already have, or it also helps us protect us against CDN takeovers. And any JavaScript. JavaScript's pretty powerful. And when JavaScript is running in the Lightning context, it gets really messy. So give us some unminified source. We don't require that you use it in production. We don't require that you use it for your customers. But for the security review step, give us an unminified source. If you're worried about IP, I promise you I'll be safe, but we can talk about it. And make sure that all your third-party libraries respect Lightning rules and don't try and take over the entire DOM. Now, that actually causes a little bit of a problem when we talk about AngularJS or React, because those try and do the exact same thing as the Lightning framework, which actually causes lots of clashing. And as of now, we won't support that. I don't know what we're going to do in the future, but right now, if you put one of those libraries in your Lightning components and try to submit it for the App Exchange, we're not going to let you through. There we go. Let's talk about how your app functions. Hormaz said, when you're rendering, you get to write to the DOM. You get to paint it however you want. That's great. But when you're in a controller, when you've presented everything to the user and you're just waiting for user interaction, or you're just displaying stuff to the user, let's make sure we're only reading from the DOM in that context. There's no reason for our state to change in the middle of the waiting period. When you're in the renderer, you can read, you can write, you can do whatever you want. Like I said, how you can step outside the framework with button clicks, you can do the same thing with set interval or set timeout. That's not a very bright laser pointer. Those will put you back into raw JavaScript in the HTML DOM, at which point you're outside the Lightning framework again. You can paint the DOM however you want. However, you lose all the Aura context. I would really encourage you to go immediately back into the Aura context with $a.getCallback. But once you're there, you're back in the controller context, so you no longer get free access right to the DOM. I would just set attributes and have your renderer do something custom on that. And event handlers, as I mentioned earlier, if we're using the Aura context, always initialize them with onClick or onPress equals, and then our Aura interpolation, curly brace, exclamation point, C dot, and then whatever your event listener is. And stable rendering. When we're rendering, we can actually fire a re-render from inside our rendering step. And normally, we've seen that happen through firing events or setting attributes. And actually, we should have a demo. So here's just a quick snippet of code. So this is our renderer. It has an after render function, which calls a super after render function, so the Lightning framework knows what's up. And then we actually get an event, and we fire it. And here we have our Dreamforce demo component, which you're about to see. And it's pretty straightforward. We have one Dreamforce bad renderer. That's fine. And we have a second one commented out. Hey, Hormaz, do you want to show us what that looks like right now?
Sure. There we go.
So yeah, this is our component. We have also our next demo up. But let's take a look at what it looks like when we run it, Hormaz. Cool. So here we see we just have hello world. We have our component there, and it says it rendered twice. We just set something to increment the counter every time that we ran a renderer. That's pretty simple. But I noticed that we have that commented out part. Can we go ahead and
Sure.
uncomment that? And let's save that. OK. Oh, that's strange. Can we click out? Oh, wow. Look at how many times that rendered. So the first time, the Lightning framework saw that we were going to get in the loop, it's fine. But we can't guarantee that you're existing in a vacuum, that you're the only one who controls it. So if your component is included multiple times, they actually started firing and responding to each other's events. And we actually had an infinite loop that the Aura framework caught and stopped, but it broke the entire page. If this was on the home page, Salesforce is done. We can't use it. So let's not have your app break all of Salesforce, because that's not good for either of our customers. So can we go back to our deck? Cool. So assuming, yep, and we can just skip those. Stop fighting me. Cool. Like we said, there's a kind of a tricky line between where your security starts and where all the Force.com protections we've built for you is. So you get to write your own code, and we just ask that you respect these few things, such as user intention. Any data modification is triggered by user action. Authorization. Don't let the fox in the trading post. Don't show your marketing people your employee database. It's standard CRUD, FLS sharing that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Input sanitization. Let's not get cross-site scripting bugs. We're all familiar with those. Let's not treat raw text as HTML when it could be dangerous. Let's not treat raw text as SOQL strings, because that also bypasses all of our authorization. And encapsulation. We all need to play in our own sandbox, because we're building small, reusable Lightning components, right? We don't have the entire page. Encapsulation is actually so important, I gave it a second slide. And these are actually 99% of the Lightning apps that I've failed have been for this reason. So what does that mean? When we're building a Lightning component, let's not touch anyone else's DOM. We have our small piece of the page. Let's play in that small piece of the page. But that actually gets tricky. And what a lot of developers get caught up on is using DOM IDs or classes. Because we're used to building entire pages, right? We built a Visualforce page. We had control over all the HTML there. Now we don't. So when we actually use a DOM ID, there's no guarantee that your DOM ID is going to be unique anymore, because you didn't write the entire page. So if I have an ID, my special ID, and Hormaz has an ID, my special ID, and I try and change something on that ID, which one will go first? Will it affect both? It's implementation specific, so we don't want to even run into this issue. When we communicate with other components, I'm sure your apps have all sorts of awesome data that they pass back and forth so they can refresh their parent, or that they can put data into their child so it knows what to render. Let's use that correctly. Let's do it through the Aura framework. And that's pretty simple. The rule of thumb is if you're communicating down to your children, set Aura attributes. If you're communicating up, fire events and have your parents listen for those events. And if you do use a custom renderer, or if you do step outside of the Lightning framework, clean up after yourself. I've seen components that have set up a little scroll window, a scroll catcher, that when it scrolls, like a little snowman dances, or something like that. Then, when we went back to the Salesforce homepage, that snowman that was dancing was still there. So it was on my contact page, completely separate from this application, and I still had some garbage left over. That's not something we want. And I think we should have a demo coming up. Let's go back and see the code. There we go. This clicker.
I'll get it.
Thank you. So the second part of our Dreamforce app. We have our breaks encapsulation app in here twice. And in our breaks encapsulation app, it fires an event sometimes, and it's just called count higher. And all it does is it gets a document element by its ID, and it creates a little list item and appends it to the list. And what we do is we set our counter higher, and we keep going. Seems straightforward, right? This should work. So Hormaz, can you show us how this works live?
1 second. Let me just.
Oh, yeah. We need to fix our demo, too. Cool. So here's our component. Let's count. Let's count to 5 or 4. And let's count to 3 here. Oh, that's weird. So we're actually grabbing the first DOM ID we see. That's what Firefox does. I don't know what Chrome does. I didn't test this demo in Chrome. But that's not something we want to run into. And I've actually seen this in a much more hilarious context when you've seen picture scrollers. So you have your little slideshow, and it says, oh, here's this picture, and then here's this picture. But when you start including it multiple times, you got one carousel of doom that's just spinning pictures every third of a second. And then everything else is just frozen on a picture of like a smiling woman. And that's funny, but that's not a good customer experience. And it's actually breaking encapsulation. That's not something we want, right, Harmaz?
Not at all.
Cool. So let's go back to our slides. And let's skip past those 2 slides, too. Awesome. So, yep. I mentioned user intention briefly. And I want to dig into that, because that happens a lot, too. Let's not take actions when the user's not ready for them. And this is similar to what we've seen in the old days of Visualforce. How many of you have gotten dinged on security review for a Visualforce auto-firing action? A few of you. Even if you're not raising your hands, I know by the ratio it's a few of you. And that's because as soon as this user loads up the page, something in the database changed. Whenever I try and demo this to our partners, I use a delete all accounts page. That you can just trick a user into visiting, and just by visiting the page, they've just deleted all their accounts. Now, what does that look like in Lightning, right? Because we don't have full pages. We have components. Well, your component has an on init step. So when your component's initialized, you can run arbitrary server code, which means that the user had no intention of doing something, but they could have deleted all their accounts. And actually, the same thing with the renderer, because you have no control over when the renderer will fire. You have no control over if it's unrendered, re-rendered, whatever. That's the Lightning framework's job. So let's not do any database manipulation on those. Now, of course, if it's not critical user data, if you're sending a log, that's fine. But we have to talk about those on a case-by-case basis. Let's not make a rule of thumb. Or the rule of thumb should be that we don't change the database without user consent. And this actually is similar to cross-site request forgery, where we trick the user into doing something they didn't want to do. But we've been up here for a while, and I know all of you will have a lot of questions. But I just want to ingrain a few things in your mind before I let you go. We need you to respect the component lifecycle. Here's a very simplified version of that very complicated diagram. Don't step outside what we've built for you. It's super useful. It's how the entire framework works. We can provide almost no guarantees for you if you're not using our tools. And that also means keeping encapsulated. I'm sure that all of you developers don't want anyone coming in and messing with your home. Don't mess with anyone else's. When we're communicating, when we're sending events, or when we're setting attributes, make sure we're doing those correctly and to our proper targets. And all the security practices that have always existed, making sure we prevent cross-site scripting, making sure we're not putting secret keys in the UI for the user to see, none of those have gone away. But my clicker is just not working with me today. Cool. We have a lot of resources for you. These slides will be posted. I realize you can't click those links now, but we have the Lightning Developers Guide. It's an awesome document.
Indeed.
It's huge. We have a PDF version, too, that's a few hundred pages. I recommend the HTML version. It's just easier to navigate and search. Lightning Development Trailhead is great for you. It has a lot of awesome tools for you to build and understand how this all works. We have our security requirements checklist, which should be your holy Bible when you're writing for the App Exchange. These are the rules that we look through when we're reviewing your app. So you pretty much have what we look for right there. There's no reason to fail when you can see everything we look for. And our Lightning security document, which talks about the goals of Lightning security, what we plan on doing now and in the future. But I think I've talked enough. I want to hear from you guys. We have a mic up there. Oh, we have a mic up there for questions. But before I let you go, because I know a lot of people will bail as soon as I say come up for questions, you just came to an awesome talk. There's a lot more awesome talks in the security space. Up next, we have Avoiding Common Security Mistakes with Travis Safford and Jeff Jarmock. I'm actually going to be at that talk. It's going to be an awesome talk downstairs in the Developer Lightning Theater, so you can actually go grab something from the admin cafe and go see it. And tomorrow, we have a few talks as well. We have quick security fixes with the Force.com scanner. All of you should be pretty familiar with it. It's a free scanner we give for Apex and Visualforce. Everyone who's gone through the App Exchange has gotten a report for it. And there's going to be a lot of awesome stuff going on there. And lastly, two-factor. What is it and why do you need it? I'm sure that we all have our own Salesforce orgs. I'm sure we all want them to be secure. Let's talk about two-factor for a minute. But I think that's just about it. So what did you think, guys? Any questions? There's a mic up there. I believe we also have a comment field on our event, but I would really like you to come talk to us up there. And if there's something sensitive, maybe you don't want the whole room to hear it, you can come find us. We'll be off to the side of the stage after we get through all of this. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hey.
Yeah. I guess, so sometimes we absolutely do need to manipulate the DOM, especially when it comes to accessibility. And I assume that when a component gets destroyed, everything within it would disappear. So I'm curious more about the situation when you mentioned the little snowman. What would cause some elements to survive the destruction of a component?
So it actually wasn't an element that was left. Because if the regular unrender will actually take all the children of a component, be those DOM children or component children, and destroy them. What they had done was they set an event handler on window that would create the dancing snowman, and then it would disappear again. So the JavaScript function was still bound to the window. And the unrender didn't know to delete that because it can't control all the event handlers on the DOM. It mostly controls the elements inside the DOM.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So we'd ask that you would unset that event handler in those cases by keeping a reference to the function. Yep.
Yeah. Hi. You guys released a vuln IO recently?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? I'm itching to use it.
I love vuln. It's one of the tools we use internally.
Sure.
I'm afraid that I'm actually not that qualified to talk about it. Our engineer who built it will be at the Developer Zone.
Developer Zone Salesforce security booth downstairs?
Yeah. So come stop by and talk to us then. I'm afraid I just don't have the answers to your questions right now.
Hi. So I have a requirement where a whitening component needs to talk client-side with a third-party application. So basically, the third-party application needs to send a post message, and the whitening component needs to capture it. Mm-hmm. But because of the worker service, we've hit a wall there. So what is the best practice to do that?
So is this third-party application outside of Salesforce?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's a tricky one.
It's a little bit tricky. As far as locker service goes, it's still currently under development, so we cannot really comment on that right now. But if you meet me after the talk, we can discuss your particular scenario. I know you've already been to the security booth. You talked to Sergey about this, I think. And we can talk more about it right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I think all the public questions are done, or everyone's too shy. We can step off to the side, and you can talk to us then. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.